Hello, everyone. I'm Captain Logan, and it's not Spawn year. It's day 60 of my comic review video day calendar. And welcome to Bat March. It is March 1st, and that means it's time to do almost exclusively Batman material through the month of March. This is a tradition that Austin and I started last year that I'm planning on continuing forward year to year. And I do have some new movies to review this month and some requests that are not Batman related, but overall, we're mostly just going to be talking about Batman stuff this month, and Austin and I are really excited about it. We have some cool big plans for you that I don't want to reveal yet, but I am extending that, of course, also to not Spawn year. So far, I've picked kind of a potpourri, random variety of different comics to talk to you about each day, and I'm going to continue doing that this month, but everything is going to be Batman related. And as I mentioned yesterday, each day I'm going to try to do a different Batman title. So comics that are featuring Batman and that or have his name in the title. Of course, they'll all feature Batman. But today's comic, of course, doesn't have Batman in the title, even though later on we'll put Batman's name up with Detective. But you got to start with Detective because that's where Batman begins, of course. I said Batman Begins. I can't help myself. And I might be doing something this month related to Batman Begins. I don't want to give away what that is yet, but I've got a plan. Hopefully it works out. But anyway, I wanted to go back to the Silver Age, and this is not the earliest Batman comic that I own. I don't know if I'll be talking about that one because I forget now which series it is. If it's a detective issue, I probably won't because I'm trying to do, like I said, a different title every day. But I think it's just a Batman issue. I'm not sure, but I do own a comic that goes all the way back to 1947. It's not in great shape, and it's nothing like in as good of shape as what I'm about to show you. But this is from 1968, and it's Detective Comics number 378, one of my favorite covers now. I think I got this in a collection, not a huge collection I bought out, but from a guy who was liquidating his father's or his grandfather's collection, I forget, and I bought several, cherry-picked several things from the Silver Age, mostly from him, and he sold me 10 or 20, I forget. I think maybe I even bought that many, 20 Detective Comics issues from that period, and they were all in this kind of shape. This guy really took care of his comics, and they're really well preserved. I've talked about this collection before when I forget which issue I was reviewing, but this was the same guy who had the fan club kit, the old Merry Marvel Marching Society kit, which was really cool to get to see one in person. And like I said, when I talked about that before, I wasn't going to spend $1,000 on it, but it was really neat to get to see one. This is quite a bit more valuable than what I paid for it, which was great. I got a really good deal on these. He gave me these for $10 a pop, so I just could not help myself. I bought as many as I had enough cash in my wallet for that day, and just look at the shape this is in. The colors are wonderfully well preserved. It doesn't have any dings on the sides. The spine looks mostly really good. It's not immaculate. It's not near mint or anything, but this is probably in fine, if not very fine condition. And I thumbed through it when I first got it, and I remember the interior looking, the pages looking pretty white and not faded. I didn't open it for this review because, like with some other real collectible things that I've talked about before, like that McFarlane Incredible Hulk cover that I talked about last week, I didn't a week or two ago. I didn't want to risk damaging it, so I just read this one in digital. But when I get an issue like this that's in this good of shape, it reminds me that at one time these things really did look new. And when you're a kid and you just have, access to artifacts from an old period that are still really cool to get to look at, but they might be faded, they might be a little dinged up. It's easy to kind of look back and imagine that time period through the lens of the piece of history that you're looking at from that time, and you got to remember that when they came hot off the press, they were as vibrant, or at least close to as vibrant as comics are now when they first come out. So at one time, this did actually look new, and this one still kind of does, which is remarkable. So this one is written by Gardner Fox with art by Frank Robbins, and these guys were both pretty prolific, and Gardner especially a powerhouse in the industry. He wrote some 4,000 stories all told in like short form prose pulp things, and then some 1,500 of those were comics for DC. So really important guy, did a lot of the heavy lifting for building the foundation of what we think of as the DC universe now. Without him, you don't have Barbara Gordon, at least as we know her. William Dozer created the concept for that character for the TV show, but she was fleshed out in comics partly by Fox, and he also co-created the original Flash, the Jay Garrick Flash, Hawkman, Dr. Fate, Zatanna, the original Sandman, so a lot of Justice Society characters. And without him, you also don't get, for better or worse, the multiverse as we know it for DC. He introduced that concept, and he wrote and he introduced it in the original Flash of Two Worlds story, which is one of the most famous DC covers, and certainly one of, if not the most famous, Flash covers. And he writes a real inventive, fun story here. He did quite a bit of Batman stuff, and then Frank Robbins, who draws this, also drew quite a bit of both Batman and Detective, and some Flash himself. Did a little bit for Marvel here and there, but mostly just random stray issues. He did a decent amount of Captain America, and he drew a lot of Invaders, but he mostly did Batman and Detective and Flash for DC, and a little bit of Superman stuff, but not a ton. But I like his art quite a bit. It's real dynamic. It's real exciting. This is a grittier comic than you might expect for this period. When I think, because this is 1968, so it would have been at the tail end of the second season, if not the beginning of the third season of the TV show. And when I think of 60s Batman comics, I think of the stuff that the TV show is parroting. So more or less those kinds of stories, but without the tongue-in-cheekness that you got in the TV show, and without that intentional kind of wink at the camera. I mean, the characters play it straight enough within the piece, but the piece itself is going, we realize this is hokey and campy, and the whole thing is a parody. It's satire. It's supposed to be like that. But the comics didn't have that kind of self-awareness. And so whenever I've read issues from this period, which hasn't been a ton, I tend to find them kind of stale, because without that, it's just kind of plugging in for a formula, and it's these really easy detective stories where Batman just has to figure out figure out a mystery through clues that to him are obvious, but nobody else would ever figure out, where it's just the most ludicrous possible, it's the only possible answer, where something like rhymes or starts with the same letter, and then of course it must be this warehouse, or Batman knows like every single thing that's going on in Gotham City, and so it's got to be at this function with Gotham's elite at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday, because the villain wrote a 9 on something. And that's fun in the Adam West show because it knows how ridiculous that is, but I've never really cared for that as much in a thing that's ostensibly supposed to be taken seriously. And this is relatively more down to earth and grittier and more serious. There still is some hokiness to be had here, particularly with coincidences and particularly with language. This thing is working overtime to be as hip as possible. Some of the lingo here with the teenage teenagers talking is kind of silly. There's a lot of phonetic speech with apostrophes that is with kids that's kind of irritating to read to me. But let me go ahead and get into the premise here because it's a fun idea. It's a real inventive setup. The only real major complaint I'll say real quick before I get into what this is even about that I have with this is just that it's 14 pages and a backup feature for Elongated Man. They're both detective stories. Remember when Detective Comics was detective stories like every time? That's kind of nice, and it's fun that since Batman is not in the title, we can feature other characters too and have a story in the back. But I wish it was maybe oversized. Of course, it would have cost more, and so you're maybe not going to do that every time, but we're having to, we've got this great cover on the front with the newspaper Batman Robin split. We have to split up this story into 2 issues because we don't have enough space to complete it, and just, reviewing this 1 issue, that was a little bit of a bummer to me. I could certainly continue reading on in digital. I don't think I own the next issue after this, but I'm going to have to talk about half a story today and not even tell you what happens at the end, and I really actually wasn't expecting that. So it doesn't get, it gets plenty done in 14 pages, but I wish I could have had all of it here. On the other hand, it does make it feel like and this was kind of a surreal experience, a serious episode of the 60s show. It gives me what I would imagine we might have had if something closer to the screen test that Adam West did was what that show actually looked like. Because when Adam West is screen testing, he's working with a script that is more serious, and he's talking about his parents' death, which only comes up, I think, 1 time in the actual show. And the color palette is darker, the lighting is moodier, and the Batcave is a lot more minimalistic, probably because they hadn't finished building it, honestly, but I don't know. But it was just kind of surreal looking at this, because if you kept with the same format that show had, where it's between 2 nights, was it Wednesday, Thursday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and and Batman has some kind of a death trap at the end, and you got to see, how he gets out of it the next day. But the tone of it was something closer to Green Hornet, then it would feel more like what this is. And so what we have here is like best of both worlds, where it's a traditional, more, again, serious crime drama, where, characters can shoot guns and get shot, and you've got gangsters, and that you've got villains that aren't just trying to steal a priceless vase or something, but you still have that kind of pulpy feel, or that movie serial feel. It would have been really neat to have had that with that TV show. And as much as I love the Adam West show and the corniness of it, I've speculated for a long time about what the future of Batman would have looked like, what things would be like now, or what they would have been like when I was a kid, how the Batman movie would have shaken out, whether it happened in 89 or earlier than that, if that show had been more serious in the first place. Like, could it have taken off the way it did in 66? Because it seemed like it was just the right place and right time for particularly that kind of take on Batman. So maybe it wouldn't have. And this is giving us that in comic form. It's really kind of neat. So as disappointed as I was not to get to see how this ends and not get to talk about that, I'll look at it on my own. I don't know if I'll ever talk about the actual ending of the story. It was kind of a neat experience to have the tune in tomorrow, moment at the end, in something that takes itself a lot more seriously. So this story is called Batman Drop Dead Twice, and that is really nice foreshadowing for what happens right at the end of this, which, even though we have that title, it still caught me off guard, and I wasn't expecting it. You have kind of a cool mystery with Batman at the end of this that the reader is trying to unravel, that isn't just following Batman and trying to unravel a mystery along with him. It separates you from your protagonist for a minute, but I suspect that very quickly into the next issue, we'll be right back with Batman, and he'll kind of reveal what exactly he's doing, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So the idea here is, and I thought this might be a Two-Face story, given the word twice, and that we start with split panels between two rebellious teenagers who are unhappy with their guardian or their adoptive parent and are wanting to be more independent and be allowed to do things their way. They're both going to get in big trouble over their defiance and their kind of hubris, kind of jumping the gun and being too stubborn. And so the idea is both, and this is the kind of the big coincidental thing, both Robin and the son of, I guess, adopted son, I'm assuming, the way, because he says he's an orphan, of a mob boss. This kid's name is Chino, and his adopted father is Salvo. And of course, you have Dick Grayson and Bruce Wayne. At exactly the same time as this mobster's kid is saying, you never let me do whatever I want, I'm done with you, punches out his adoptive father and runs off and basically says, I'm going to run my own crime syndicate. I'm going to show you, Dad, that I can do this myself, and I'm going to pull, like, the crime of the century. And at the same time that that's happening, Robin is doing the superhero version of the same thing, where he says, I don't need you anymore, Batman. How many times have we seen this later on with Dick Grayson or another Robin? He's doing kind of the Batman Forever thing, where he says, we're supposed to be partners, but you keep bossing me around, and you don't trust me, and you don't give me any independence. And so if we're not going to be partners, he says at the beginning, I don't mind being a junior partner, but it's got to be partner. And so they both, it's hilariously over the top, punch out their fathers and then leave. And because that happens at exactly the same time, and they're both homeless now, they both show up at the same motel or like kind of rundown apartment complex, I guess, and they both need a place to stay. And the mobster kid, Chino, he still has plenty of money, but Dick Grayson, I guess, didn't bring any with him. So he's broke. So these two guys end up rooming together, and very quickly it goes south for Dick when he realizes that, the guy that I'm rooming with is bad news and is this mobster kid who wants to go into business for himself, and I don't want to be involved with that business, of course. I'm a crime fighter, and so he's got a gun and that Dick Grayson finds, and it feels kind of after school special for just 3 seconds, where it's like, ooh, a gun, oh no, what are you gonna do, Dick Grayson? And they fight over it for a minute, and just look at these kind of jagged panel layouts. This is real cool and a little ahead of its time, I think, for this period. And I like all the kind of hit marks, the like bright colors whenever characters get smashed, some good onomatopoeias, ka-thomp, ka-chalk. Real dynamic, and a lot of effort put into making this as exciting and engaging as possible. I think both of these guys are firing on all cylinders, the writer and artist here. And Sacchino says, this is now a dictatorship. You're going to do what I want. I have a plan, and I'm basically just using you. Like, I wanted this to be a partnership, kind of ironic because that's why Robin left Batman. He says, I wanted this to be a partnership, but we're not about the same things, so I'm going to use you, and I'm going to make you do what I want. I'm the one that has the gun. So he just happens to have a Robin suit that he bought from a costume shop that is, I guess, a perfect replica that fits Dick Grayson exactly like his regular costume and doesn't look any different whatsoever. And so we have a comedy of errors here. We get into kind of a fun Shakespearean place where this guy is making Dick Grayson pretend to be Robin when he doesn't realize that he's actually the real Robin. And for a second, you think maybe he's figured it out because he says, oh, you're about the same size and build. And you showed up at the same time as Robin left Batman, but he actually hasn't put that together at all. By the way, I just want to say I like the period clothes here, the kind of over the top color schemes for the mobster suits, the greens and purples and oranges. And so this kid had this plan just in case something like this happened, where he's like, so here's what I want to do. I want to find somebody that kind of looks like Robin, make him wear the costume, and then use him for bait so that I can lure Batman to me and then murder Batman. And then the whole underworld will be, will like worship the ground I walk on and will be super impressed with me, and I'll be able to do anything I want after that. I'll be like the top man on campus, basically. It's kind of like what happens with Sid the Squid in The Man Who Killed Batman and Batman in the Animated Series, the guy who accidentally seems to have killed Batman, and the whole underworld is intimidated by him. This guy is trying to create that. He's trying to manufacture that situation. And I guess he stole this idea from his adopted dad, who is trying to do the exact same thing. So yeah, this is a real contrived situation, but it's also a lot of fun, where he goes, well, I have a henchman who doesn't remotely look like Robin, but he'll, look like it enough from a distance that I can lure Batman to me and do the same thing and try to kill Batman. We're not told that Chiro got this idea from Chino. Probably not Chiro. I guess it's Chino. A Chiro is a Mexican dessert. But this Chino kid, I'm assuming, must have gotten it from his dad, because it doesn't really make sense that they would both think of it at the same time. But he never says that. So I guess it makes sense that he would be taking credit for it, of course. So they both try to do the same scheme, the same plot at the same time, because this newspaper just came out that said that Robin is no longer with Batman. And I wonder when Chino would have tried this if that had never happened. So that's a little bit easy. Real quick, while we're on this page, this is a thing that we did during the Silver Age that kind of goes away, I think, at least by Bronze, and certainly I didn't see it much growing up in the late 80s, early 90s, where you'd have ads on the same page sometimes as some of the rest of the story. And so meanwhile, Batman is kind of berating himself for running Robin off. He's like, both of them ultimately kind of regret their choices here, and that they both acted rationally and weren't considering the possible consequences of their actions. So I like that Batman is somewhat responsible here as well, even though I think Robin is much more at fault. We also don't really get very much about what the beef is exactly. It's just very generically, you don't treat me like an adult. I'm going to punch you in the face and leave and never come back. It would have been nice if we'd gotten more of the argument at the beginning, but then it would have been harder to get to the I want to say climax, but to the cliffhanger here, because Fox has only got 14 pages to work with. So Batman is lamenting that he's made some mistakes and run Robin off, and Robin is Dick Grayson is missing now, and he's like, what was I thinking? It's a dark, bleak world out there. There's all kinds of horrible things that can happen to him. Again, very different than 60s Batman, where we've got the city that is called Gotham but doesn't look remotely gothic, and the worst thing that happens is villains show up and try to steal, priceless artifacts and stuff. So the stakes are a little bit higher in this, and I certainly appreciate that. When that's your standard at the time, this looks certainly a lot grittier and a lot more exciting than it might have a little bit later. I do think it's pushing, believe it or not, in 1968, I do think it's pushing the Comics Code Authority about as far as you can push it, probably, just with what violence is here and some of the themes of the book and stuff. They get more lax with things by the 70s and 80s, and then, like I was talking about yesterday with Green Arrow, DC would just start, not even caring about the code and would just put stuff out without it. So we've got our real Robin and our fake Robin, but both of the bad guys think that they're working with a fake Robin, which is kind of fun. And then Dick Grayson gets put on a hook when he's not expecting it and is forced to just kind of dangle around like Arthur in the animated Tick episode Heroes with the deadly bulb, and he's just floating around on this hook, hoping that he can find a way out of it, but not really hoping Batman will show up, because the whole thing is a trap. It's a trap. It's a ruse to get Batman there and shoot him. The mob boss, I should mention, has a hitman called the Icer that he's planning on using to shoot Batman. And I would give, because he's a professional, I would give the Icer I'd put my chips on him if I was a betting man over this kid that's like Dick Grayson's age being able to shoot and kill Batman when he lures him there. So Batman's big dilemma is, I've gotten these fingerprints from two different people. Again, a really fun detective story situation. How do you solve this? I've got Dick Grayson's fingerprints from two different sources that claim to be holding him for ransom, trying to lure Batman, trying to get Batman to come to them. And they can't both have Robin. So what's happening is, and again, pretty contrived, the mob boss got his hands on I don't know how you even set this plan up. The whole thing is working its way backwards, where he went to some function, or sent a henchman to some function that Batman and Robin were at. Not Dick Grayson and Bruce Wayne, but this is during a period where Batman and Robin are more public. And so he got Dick Grayson's fingerprints off a glass or something, just in case he tried this plot. And then the kid, his son, gets Dick Grayson's fingerprints, or Robin's fingerprints, some other way. And I can't remember what that is, but there's also kind of a contrived thing where he's like, I've also got his fingerprints. Or maybe it was like a copy that he got from his father. I forget, because they look like the exact same angle of the fingerprint. But he doesn't actually use Dick Grayson's fingerprints because he doesn't think he's Robin, even though if he did that, it would be the same fingerprints, which is kind of fun. So Batman goes, well, I've got to figure out a way to be in two places at once. And the first thing I'm thinking is, okay, he's going to send Alfred in a batsuit. That's how he would do it in the 60s show. He'd send, Alfred to one and he'd go to the other one. That's probably a bad idea, though, because he has to expect that it's a trap. So you're putting Alfred in, like, massive mortal danger if you do that. Well, you get to the end here, and Batman shows up in the Batcopter and tries to save the fake Robin, like the actual fake Robin, because at first you think he's only going to go to one place. It's like the situation in Dark Knight, where it's like you've got Harvey Dent in one place and Rachel at the other, and you don't know which one is at which place. Here, you've got Dick Grayson and a fake Robin, and he shows up to the wrong one. So you're like, oh no, you went to the wrong one, Batman. What's Dick Grayson's fate going to be? But then he somehow winds up at both of them, even though he says, of course, he can't be in two places at once. So the kind of William Dozer-esque narration at the end is, this would be voiceover in the TV show, two Batmen? And both to die? Is it possible? And yet, we're seeing it happen. Or is the slight quicker than the sight? So we have some of that same wordplay that you have in 60s Batman, and a lot of alliteration and stuff. The answer will come in the next horror-defying September issue of Detective Comics. So that's a lot of fun. So it's a mystery, like I said, for the reader now. How is Batman at both of these places? One of them can't be Batman, and if it turns out one is Alfred, I'm gonna really cry foul on that because I don't see him swinging around on a line like that. But this is kind of an unusual, amusing situation. I enjoyed this a lot. I just wish all of it was here so I could talk about the ending. But I also have to mention that when Batman, and I don't know which one is the real Batman, but when he shows up to save the fake Robin in his Batcopter, he's talking to the pilot. He says, "It's Robin. Hold her steady, pilot. I'm going down." Who's the pilot? So, like, Batman hires a helicopter pilot that doesn't know he's Bruce Wayne? That's interesting. Can he fly the helicopter himself? Like, is he capable of that? I wonder. I've never seen that. That's crazy. That's like the parachute pickup service. Like, he just has somebody that goes and does that. And I've always wondered with the parachute pickup service if they just work for Batman or if they ever go pick up other parachutes, or is it like the Bat parachute pickup service? I can't remember. Like, that is such a specific job that you'd be sitting around bored, just like playing tiddlywinks and eating sandwiches so often. But I would assume that the helicopter pilot probably actually does fly for other helicopters. Anyway, I'm getting away from myself, and I'm already at half an hour somehow, so I'm going to go ahead and quit. But I'll just mention real briefly, we have kind of a fun Elongated Man story at the end of this, which is also written by Gardner Fox. He's great at coming up with these inventive, off-the-beaten-path kinds of detective stories that aren't just basic whodunit things. So with this story, you have a guy who keeps bothering everybody in his apartment complex because he's shooting his gun in the house. And, like, you're not supposed to do that. He's, at first we're told, or he says that he's paranoid that he claims that he's a journalist, and he's like an investigative journalist that has maybe like sniffed out like a mob boss or somebody, I forget who, but like somebody that can do him harm if he writes an article about them and exposes them for something. And so he thinks that there's bombs all over his apartment, and he just keeps shooting like lamps and sofas and things. And then it turns out that there really are bombs in his house, or at least things set up to look like bombs, but the whole thing is a setup. It turns out Elongated Man is a detective like Batman. He has stretchy powers, but he's also really good at noticing clues, and he's very observant, and whenever things don't seem right, he's got kind of a spider sense. This is kind of kooky, but he's got his nose kind of starts to extend or bounce around, and that's how you know that something is not as it seems. And so, like I said, it's like spider sense, and so he knows that the guy is lying because that his nose tells him that. And it turns out that, again, this is a real quick story. This is 9 pages. He figures out that this guy is actually working with some thieves that are stealing stuff in this apartment complex. And every time he shoots his gun, it distracts everybody in the complex. They don't know what these other criminals are doing. And this guy is actually a mastermind of that whole plot. And it's a ridiculous scheme, because you'd think at some point the cops would just show up and you'd get arrested for firing a firearm indoors. And like, it's 1968 and it was a different time, but I'm still pretty sure that you couldn't get away with that. I'm pretty sure, disturbing the peace and noise pollution was still a problem. So anyway, that's a hilarious story, and I quite enjoyed it as well. So that is my comic for today. These might be a little bit longer than some of my other Not Spawn Year videos because it's Batman, and I always have opinions and a lot to say about Batman. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back again with another one tomorrow. Don't know what era I'm doing yet, but I can guarantee you it will be Batman. Once again, appreciate you being here, and I will see you again tomorrow. I was Captain Logan, and happy reading.